Wow, look at this. Check out what they do from Miguel here. Whoever animated this shot is a genius. Let's look at this movement frame by frame because there's really interesting things going on here.
Spider-Man! You're a mistake!
Today, we're going to be looking at the scene in Across the Spider-Verse where Miles Morales and Miguel O'Hara are facing off at the very end of the movie. There's a lot to discuss in this, so we're going to take a look at this shot by shot and find some really cool things that the animators are doing. So let's take a look.
What are those claws? Dude, are you sure you're even Spider-Man?
You?
Okay, so off the bat, we got some really cool foreshortening going on. Because they're in 3D animation, it makes foreshortening a lot easier. The hand on the right side of screen is almost as large as the entire body on the left side of frame. And as Miguel comes through, you have these really cool inverted colors, and you get this really amazing smear frame. I almost forgot the word for smear frame. So this smear frame acts as a motion blur to lead your eye from this pose right into this pose. Usually what you do with smear frames is you want to have the end of the smear frame, or rather the start, be about on screen where the part of the body that's moving was in the frame before. Roughly speaking, the arm shape is around here. So the next frame where the hand ends up over here, that's where the end of your smear frame is going to be. And then this part in the middle is the arc. Arcs in animation are very important because nothing in real life moves in a straight line. So usually if you're moving your arms, you're arcing them. You kind of want that with these smear frames to indicate that the arm is moving naturally. Okay, this is only the first 9 frames of this shot. Let's keep going. You get a reaction shot of Miles here, as well as the color pops when the advertisements go over him. So it seems like these color pops are pretty random, but I believe what's happening is they're using this to simulate the lighting from this purple portion on the right side of screen here that has moved up this way. It gives a really neat duotone effect to the entire scene with the purple and the yellow contrasting colors on the side of Miles's face. And here we get the logic that Miles can't move himself higher on the train because his webs are going back down. Okay, let's look at the next few shots.
Who do you think you are? Really?
So it seems like with these color pops, in color theory, they are using opposite colors to get a better readability on the characters. As cool as these color pops are, what's really important for the audience is readability. If the characters were just completely lost in color, then the audience would be really disoriented. Okay, let's look at the split screen effect here.
My name is Miles Morales.
So you get this great close-up of Miles Morales breathing heavy. From an acting point of view, you kind of see the change of emotions from his tired, confused look of him not being sure what to do to this determined expression. And the way you get that is through furrowing the brows. It's very subtle, but from this frame to this frame, you get this change in expression, and you get this really great side-by-side of the character on the left side with the close-up of his facial expression on the right side. And then in a similar way that we talked about earlier, you get this determined look when the brows furrow and the eyes squint and the cheeks come up like this. So the brows come down, cheeks go up, and the eyes squint up to be more determined. And then on the left side of screen, you see him start to jump off. He's predicting what he's going to be doing. And now you get this falling silhouette of Miles. At this point, Miles Morales upside down is such an iconic image. So that's what they're going for here. And you can see we start to get this split screen of the character doing a somersault in the air. And what's important for these split screens is that you don't want to confuse the audience of where to be looking at all times. So you have the action sort of mirroring at the same time. So when he becomes more flat on the right side of screen, you have the version of him on the left side start to do the same thing of flipping over. Oh, there's some drama outside. I want to know. I need to know. And then you get this really cool callback of the feet jumping off of the platform where it breaks like it did in the first movie when he jumps off the glass building. And even in this really quick shot, you can see that they're utilizing a smear to indicate that the arm is coming up, getting ready to strike. This technique in animation is super underrated. Check this out. If you notice, the head on Miguel is not getting lost in the silhouette of the character. And the reason being is because his head is not tangenting with the shoulders. When two lines are very close together in 2D animation, this is called a tangent. So for example, in this shot here, you have Miguel's head poking out of the silhouette of his shoulders. But it would be a lot different if, let's say, the shoulders were in this shape and the head was right here. So let's say this was the pose that the animator used. The head would be getting lost underneath the shoulders and it wouldn't be sticking out against the silhouette. So the fix for this is to drop the shoulders down so that the head actually pokes out just a little bit, and it creates this separation of elements. When animators pose their characters in 3D, they are thinking of techniques like this to make sure that the pose is legible. This shot is so quick that you want to make sure that the audience knows that Miguel is ready to strike Miles as he comes in. Speaking of strong poses, this pose is great because you have all of the limbs separate from each other, nothing's overlapping and getting lost. And what they didn't do was hide the foot behind this other leg. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to read this pose that well. The legs are framing Miles's foot here and making it really clear what he's about to do next. And even this pose is probably something that is exaggerated. If this was in real life, his foot would probably be behind his leg the way that legs actually move. It probably wouldn't be kind of swung out like it is here. But again, the animators really want you to see what's about to happen.
I was bitten by a radioactive spider.
Let's look at Miles's kick onto Miguel. So on this quick shot here, you can see how the animators are moving Miles to show that his kick is really strong. And this is the way they do that. They're actually leading this movement with Miles's hips first. So the hips start over more screen right, and before the leg even comes through, we have this anticipation of the leg coming back, but the hips have already started to move screen left. So you can tell that the movement has already started, and you get the sense that the foot is following through from being led by the hips. And man, I mean, look at these smear frames. Sometimes with smear frames, what you can do is you can lead the action with a smear frame on the second frame of the character's pose on twos. I'll show you what I mean here. So Miguel hits this pose before he slams onto the train. And if you notice on the next frame, they add these blue smear frames in here to indicate his legs starting to move through space. And then on the next frame, you have these graphic kind of fan-shaped smear frames coming through. And again, this is only on screen for one frame. And it's not something you're going to see, but it's rather something that the audience is going to feel. I love the way that they use smear frames on Miguel's arm blades. The blades themselves sort of act as a smear on their own. So when the arm gets pulled back into this pose here, you know, this red smear that's coming through, again, pops off of his body so you can see it. The arm itself is sort of being molded into this sort of like axe shape. So that's something that the animators can do. They can turn the arm off for just this frame, and then it seems like the arm turns back on here so that we see the fingers and everything. It seems like every time they're showing Miguel's claws, the fingers are curled up like this. So some really quick shots here of Miles being thrown in the air, Miguel catching him in midair. So let's see what's going on here.
I was bitten by a radioactive spider.
It seems like the way Miles moves in these movies is that his limbs are sort of following his body in just a frantic movement, sort of giving the implication that Miles is still growing into his body and figuring out how he moves through space. If you saw in my other reaction video about Spider-Gwen, the way that she moves is very deliberate, and she moves like a ballerina and has complete control over the way that she lands and the way that she moves. So it makes sense to add in some duplicate limbs on Miles like they have here with his hand, and again, this little wedge shape of the arm coming through. And then you get this great shot of Miguel shooting his version of his web slinger at Miles to catch him. You can see the way that this web slinger wraps around Miles is not to have a smooth round shape like Miles's webs, but they're moving very meticulously. So Miles gets pulled back and up by Miguel, and you're going to start to see some amazing painted smear frames in the background. Look at this. Oh my goodness. I don't know if this is hand drawn or if this is just a shader that's coming through with these like brush strokes that you have, but wow. Hats off to the animators and the comp team and every other department on this movie, because you guys knocked it out of the park.
I'm pretty sure you know the rest, jerk.
Here's another example of foreshortening. When the camera zooms in on Miles here, this is similar to what we talked about earlier, where you have the shoulders leading the action of his arm coming through, but you also have his head being pushed into the corner. And the reason they're doing this is because they want you to see that he's about to throw this ball of web at Miguel. So they sort of slow down time to get this wind up. And again, the elbow is leading here before the arm shoots the webs at Miguel. Because this camera movement is so so complex, you really do need to be deliberate about what you're showing and for how long. And on this color pop, you have the webs as a completely different color from the purple that's sort of taken over. Once again, you have a really strong pose on Miles where the limbs are separated. And again, you know, you have the foot breaking that silhouette. Great pose here. So the physics of this shot are definitely questionable, but it's flying spider people. So the web wraps around one of these billboard tunnel things and it flings Miles into the interior where the actual traffic is moving. And speaking of silhouettes again, you have Miles silhouetted against the bright yellow background here, and his spider suit being black, this worked perfectly. Because we're about to have a really frantic camera move in this next shot, you want the audience to be able to see Miles at the start of the shot. In terms of screen space, what they're doing is they have Miles at the start on this side of the screen, sort of in the middle. And then the start of the next shot for the audience's eye across the cut should be about in the center of frame again for the audience to catch up to the action. And it also helps that Miles is still silhouetted against the blue sky. Whoever animated this shot is a genius. Seriously, if I was assigned this shot as an animator, I'd be like, you want me to do what now? Miles falls through. He gets hit by a bus. The camera flips over. He starts to try to grab onto stuff. And again, his limbs are completely flinging through the air. He gets hit by another bus. He gets hit by a car, bounces off another truck, gets hit by another bus, bounces off another car. And that's where we end up. Wow, lots to talk about in this one. Let's go through this. As frantic as this shot is, they are using some techniques so that the audience can keep their eye on the prize, which is Miles. Miles is still moving on twos throughout this entire sequence, even though the background is completely flipping around and moving very frantically. They highlight certain actions by having him move on ones, like him being hit by a car where he needs to flip over really fast. So you notice if we step through this, okay, his pose is changing every frame, but then we start to have him move on twos again. But if you notice, the background is still rotating behind him on ones. It just gives the impression that the world is moving so fast around Miles and he's trying to regain his composure. But for us as the audience, we need to be able to see Miles going through this space and adhere to the rules that have been set by the rest of the movie. So he tries to grab on here and gets flung up. You'll also notice that the camera is being shaken every time Miles impacts one of the cars. So when Miles gets hit here, he does pop to this other color card where the rest of his body is blue against a darker forest green and a yellow. So again, only on screen for, let's count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 frames. But these color pops are being used artistically to emphasize certain hits and actions. And then Miles finally gains control on top of the car. The hands grab onto the roof of the car here first, but the legs are still flipping over. A few frames later, now his legs are all the way over here. So they've arced all the way across this way, and they end up over here.
What's up, man?
So when I first saw this shot in theaters, I thought this was the alternate version of his roommate, but I guess that's not the case. Something interesting about this camera panning over is that when you finally do see Miguel silhouetted against the white here, if we were following this logically, he would probably be somewhere like here in screen space. But again, we want the audience to read this as quick as possible because it's only going to be on screen for about 5 frames. So we're going to cheat Miguel to the center of screen space where we want him to be popping out of towards Miles. In animation and filmmaking, this is called a cheat.
You don't get it! You're in the novel!
Not if you let me go home!
So between these two shots, they're actually using this color pop as a transitional element where the characters turn blue and the rest of the background changes to a different color. And you can see that Miguel is completely blue here, and in the start of the next shot, he's blue again. Dabba-dee-dabba-da. Because this punch is so quick, we have to have this anticipation pose of Miguel leaning back to punch Miles. So you need to hold on this for a few extra frames so that the audience has time to read what he's about to do. Something I've mentioned in my other reactions, like the Puss in Boots The Last Wish video, is that you have this action carry through the cut. So Miguel has already punched here, but in the start of the next shot, his arm is still cocked back a little bit so that the audience has time to catch up again to what is going on. An interesting artistic choice that they're using in this shot is they have the lens flare from the headlights on this car sort of act as an impact frame when Miles hits the top of the car. So the lights are not visible until his head is right here. So it's just a really interesting, creative way to use an impact. And then here Miguel gets hit by this car, so we're popping to another different color scheme. But again, you have Miguel flipping through the world and his limbs are coming off of his body at any chance they get. And now he lands on this other car. On this shot of Miguel landing, you have some secondary animation with his head following the rest of his body when he lands. So you have Miguel's body hitting the car on this frame, but his head is still up this way. And then in the next few frames, the head's gonna lower to meet the rest of the body as if his chest is hitting the car first. And now you see that the body is actually bouncing off of the top of the car, but his head has moved down to match where the body was in the few frames before. And you get this really great shot of the person pointing this way towards where Miles is, but you see the reflection of Miguel in there as well. The audience has one place to look at this point. So if you notice, they didn't have Miguel's reflection over here and then the woman's head here pointing that way. They're actually just putting this on top of each other. I think this is great. When Miles says snitch, you see this sort of graffiti text next to him. It does look like this graffiti text is on a piece of geometry that they are squashing and stretching as he swings by, and it's just tied to him in 3D space.
Everywhere you go, you're an anomaly.
And Miguel shoots off here. And again, you get that camera shake to emphasize that this motion is really powerful. So when Miles gets snatched here, you can tell because the color changes again. He gets whipped through and thrown against the top of the exterior here. I think they're outside now. Yeah, and you get this really great impact shape on the left.
You're an anomaly.
So I'm trying to figure out what happens here. So Miguel jumps off like he's going to slam his blades down on Miles, but then, so that's his back, and then, oh, so Miles catches him, I think? Yeah, so it looks like Miles is catching Miguel in the air and slamming him this way. Yeah, so this is a shot where Miles has the upper hand. Something cool they do with impact frames a lot is they have the shape continue into space as if the impact itself is pointing in the direction that it will be going. So for example, the spikes are going this way. So you can assume the shape is going to continue in that direction. That yes, indeed, they do continue these spikes moving this way. Maybe this is another instance where they could have added a smear frame. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but let's see what happens if we add this in ourselves. And maybe this is an instance where they tried to add a smear frame. They realized that it was too quick and it didn't really work. So now you can see if I frame through here, you have the first punch and then our arc. But that's just an example of how you can add smear frames to your own animations. So here's the deal. I recorded this reaction a few weeks ago, and when I started editing it, I realized that the screen recording actually stopped halfway through this. So a little behind the scenes for you, I'm recording the screen recording on a separate computer. So the video that I was drawing over and reacting to was actually moving, but the screen recording was just recording a still frame of the video. Really cool. Clearly, because of all this shenanigans, I still have a lot to learn about being a YouTuber, which is why I'm very excited to talk to you about today's video sponsor, Skillshare. If you haven't heard by now, Skillshare is the largest online platform for creatives, featuring thousands of high-quality classes led by industry professionals and experts. If you're watching this channel, you might have an interest in learning the basics of 3D. Skillshare has you covered with classes like 3D modeling for beginners with Blender. You can learn all the essential workflows for using Blender, which is free, by the way. Once you master the basics, you can expand your skill set with Blender's geometry nodes, the closest thing I've seen in 3D software to actual magic. In that case, check out Create Satisfying Animations with Geometry Nodes by Smeef. I've mentioned before that I'm learning Python from Alvin Wan's classes, and it's really helped me learn more about using Blender to its fullest potential. Summer's not over yet, and it's a fantastic time to dive into your passions and your hobbies, especially with more free time due to school breaks and slower work schedules. Any successful creative will tell you how important it is to keep an open mind and continue learning new skills, and I couldn't agree more. It's been very rewarding to know that I can continue my learning journey with the help of Skillshare. And here's the cool part. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Seriously, this is a really cool deal. I highly recommend exploring their extensive library of classes because there really is something for everyone here. So click the link in the description and start your learning journey today. Now let's see if Miles Morales can learn how to defeat Miguel O'Hara in these next few shots. So with quick shots like this, it's important to establish really good silhouettes on your characters because this shot is going to go by so quickly that we need to make sure that everything is readable and legible, especially when we have such a chaotic background like you see here. What's really interesting about this is these really dynamic and interesting smear frames that they have of the background as it goes down this way. Okay, let's look at this movement frame by frame because there's really interesting things going on here. So when Miles is trying to reposition himself and grab onto the train, there's some really interesting shapes they're adding in here so that your eye can see what's going on. So when Miles moves up this way, you see his hand has this additional smear element. And we're really just continuing this arc here where we started over here and moving all the way over here. And then when his feet kick out in front of camera, you can see this is another example of offset where we have the legs kicking in front of camera separately. Obviously, this foot is more pronounced when it goes in front and it has this smear wipe effect. And then when his other foot comes through, you have this continuation of the movement of his legs kind of flailing over the side here. But by using some offset, the animators are able to add a little bit of flair to this movement so that it doesn't feel like both feet are stuck together as they move. And again, you have another quick movement of his hand here coming down and hitting onto the train. So you have some additional smears on that as well. And you know, if we play this movement at speed, it's a really quick movement.
You're the original anomaly!
I really like this quick shot of Miguel here. If you notice the way that his arm moves up here, they actually flip the arm over 180 degrees. So it's facing down to the left right now, and then in the next frame, it's actually facing to the right. The general rotation of the blade isn't really changing that much, so it allows us to do these things like flipping the arms over this way in order to gear up to have this giant movement where he comes down. And again, utilizing the rules we established earlier of every time there's an impact, we have this color pop. They do exactly that here when Miguel hits onto the train. And you get to see these really great impact shapes coming off of the train as he pushes his elbow blade into the train here. And we can see these other color pops when the advertisements go over Miguel like here. It's a little compressed here, but I really do like these additional lines that are on the outside of Miguel. It's just a really great detail to add to his sketchy overall design.
The original anomaly!
Here's a secret detail that the Spider-Verse animators put in you only see when you go frame by frame. This is a really great detail to emphasize that Miles is really out of place and feels like a kid again, being told that he's not supposed to be here. When Miles is told that he's the original anomaly, you get to see this flash of him glitching out. And on one frame, you can even see the original costume that Miles was wearing in the first Spider-Verse movie. Now we cut back wide to this establishing shot of the train going farther and farther up, and then we get this zoom in effect. And again, notice how they're using strong silhouettes on Miles to keep him separate from the background that is completely white behind him. So I don't know if anyone has ever said this, but there's a really interesting way that they're animating his web shooters here. As you know, Miguel's character is very focused on keeping the timeline of things in check. Miguel's whole mission is to try to save the multiverse from collapsing. His web shooters actually kind of look like the multiverse timeline. As we've established with the other spider people, the way that their web shooters work is first they will have a frame where the web shoots out, but it's very fluid. There's a lot of slack to it. It's not taut. So check out what they do for Miguel here. Miguel's web, when it's straight, actually has different branches on it as if it's the multiverse timeline. It's almost as if Miguel is using the power of the multiverse to propel himself forward. Isn't that so cool?
Miguel!
The spider that gave you your powers wasn't from your dimension. It was never supposed to bite you!
If you want to get better at character animation, check out what they're doing to Miguel O'Hara in Spider-Verse. So the movement that he's doing is he has to reach from all the way back here to pull himself up and put his hand close to camera. So the way you would start this is first you would set a keyframe here and a keyframe here. So what's going to happen is the computer is going to interpolate between those two poses. But here's the problem. It's going to do it so perfectly that we have to go back in and add imperfections. One way to do this is through a principle called offset. Offset is when you have two or more elements moving in a scene and you offset the timing of one of them so that they're not moving together. So you might be thinking, but there's only Miguel in this shot. How do you do this on a person? Here's what they did. For these larger movements, they should start from the core of your character and work their way out to the outer limbs. So in this case, Miguel's head actually goes into its position first, then his shoulder, then his arm, then his hand. So the first thing they do is have his body move up and his head get into position. In the next pose, they have his shoulder pop up here and continue the arm upwards, and then you see the hand come down here. It makes a much more fluid and appealing animation. You can tell Miles' suit is starting to rip here because the smear colors that they're using on his hands are actually flesh colored now instead of that red and black that we were seeing earlier. Now we have this great shot where the camera is Dutched, which means that it's turned on its axis this way. Here's another establishing shot so that we know exactly where we are in this space.
You're not supposed to be Spider-Man!
No! You're lying! I'm Spider-Man!
So here's a way that they use the edit to make sure that the audience knows exactly what's going on here. There's a quick shot of Miles where he turns around and tries to catch Miguel by surprise by shooting him with his webs. But in order to make the audience aware of what's going on, they need to hold that pose for just a few frames long at the end. So normally you would probably cut somewhere around here, but because this movement and shot is so quick, you need to add a couple additional frames at the end to really let the audience gather their thoughts for just a millisecond and see, okay, he shot his webs towards Miguel. Then you have this amazing shot of Miguel breaking the webs as he comes through with his arms. And you get this really solid smear frame right here on Miguel. I love on this color burst that you can actually see some of the notes that the colorist would usually leave. Here's another example of them using the blades on Miguel's arms to act as a smear frame. You have Miguel hit this pose where his elbows are actually at a crisscross with each other. So you get the understanding that a movement is going to happen in this general direction here. And then when the arms come through, you have this really interesting smear shape that has the arc of the movement baked into the shape.
Fine! I'm Spider-Man!
You're a mistake!
Here's another example of how they're holding poses to anticipate the next movement. So when Miguel pops off the train here to try to grab Miles, what you're gonna see is Miguel has this pose here where his hand is actually stationed back this way before it comes through and tries to grab Miles in the foreground here. But they're actually holding onto this pose where his hand is back for a few additional frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so about 8 frames here. And then the hand goes towards camera, so you know that in the next shot, we're gonna get Miles being grabbed by Miguel, which is exactly what you see here. And here's another example where they have this really intricate straight line shape for Miguel's web shooter here. And then again, they have this multiverse branched effect on his web shooters. Just a really cool detail for this character. So I'm actually gonna stop it here. If you wanna see any reactions to any other Spider-Verse scenes, let me know in the comments. Also, if there's other movies you want me to react to and analyze frame by frame like this, I love doing these. So please let me know in the comments what movies you wanna see reacted to. Until next time, thanks for watching.